Hello, I'm Liz from Wolf Studios, and this is a short tutorial on how to construct the fallow field Shweater. And it also applies to the original Shweater or anything that you want to Shweaterize. Now, in brief, a Shweater is just a combination of shawl and sweater, obviously. And it's called that because it's really just a shawl that we have seamed sleeves into. The way that that is done is really simple, but it can be a little bit confusing, especially when you see it written out. So in brief, Shweater is just a top-down shawl that's constructed in a half circle or half hexagon shape. And when you get to a certain point where you want to be able to start your sleeves, you're going to add pairs of double yarn overs for each sleeve. So you're going to add 2 yarn overs on the back side and 2 yarn overs on what will be the front side. So I'll swing my girl around here. And on for the other sleeve, same thing. 2 yarn overs on the front, 2 yarn overs on the back. The reason they're double yarn overs is just that you want enough yarn there at the end to be able to seam your sleeves up. You want it a double wide gap, basically. So what you're going to do when you're constructing your Shweater is simply start knitting from the top down. So if you're knitting the fallow field Shweater, you're starting up at the neck and you're working your way down. And what you're constructing is a shawl in this shape, just a very simple half circle or half hexagon. And you're going to have your increases going here, and you'll have increases going out along what will be the front edges as well. And that's it to start with. You're just constructing this shape. But what happens when you get to the part where you're ready to add your sleeves, and that's really up to you. You can follow the pattern exactly as written if you want yours to be exactly like the sample. You can also just try it on as you go, pinch it together around your upper arm and see where it feels comfortable to you and start that. It really doesn't matter. But what you're going to do for the fallow field Shweater in particular is locate the center motif. Now, up to this point, it's 3 repeats of an identical panel. So you've got 3 identical panels that form your Shweater. And again, you'll notice in the shape, it's just 3 identical panels. For the original Shweater, it continues to be just 3 identical panels. You see that I have what kind of looks like little 8s drawn on here. Those are where you're going to add your double yarn overs. So you're going to add a double yarn over in the middle of what will become the front sections, and then right next to what's been your increase row, your increase columns. Later on, what we're going to do is seam those up, and we'll end up with our sleeves. But for the fallow fields in particular, we have a little bit of a problem because we have this center motif right there. If we try and put our double increases directly in the center of this front panel, you're going to have a seam running directly through your lovely leaf and bobble motif. So we don't want that. So instead, and you'll see this in the charts if you look at the pattern, you're going to start knitting my row. So I'm working top down, I'm going to be coming this way, and as soon as I hit the first line showing me where the center motif is, I'm going to add a pair of yarn overs. And I'm going to want to add stitch markers on either side too, so that I know for sure these are where my double yarn overs are. That's important. You definitely want to know exactly where those are throughout the rest of this. So I'm going to add my double yarn overs there. Then I'm just going to keep knitting that chart until I get to the end of that first repeat. So now I'm through this first panel. It looks exactly like the back up to this point because we haven't done anything other than adding those double yarn overs. So I'm knitting, knitting, knitting. I'm on this first panel. I get to the end and I'm going to add another pair of double yarn overs. I already have 1 stitch marker in to remind me of when to do my increases. So all I need to do is add another stitch marker so that I have stitch markers on both sides of my double yarn overs. Again, really important that we keep track of where those double yarn overs are, so you want to make sure that you add that extra stitch marker. Then I can work across this middle panel, what's going to become the back, just like normal, just knit, 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 knit in the pattern. And then, same thing, I'm going to get to my other increase column, and just like the pattern says, I'm going to work another pair of yarn overs, again adding my stitch markers so that I know where those are. Then I'm going to, again, keep working, keep working, keep working, keep working until I get to the other side of the center motif. So we want, on both sleeves, we want the center motif to be on what will be the sleeve. So I'm going to work past that center motif, and as soon as I get to the end of the center motif as I'm working, so the far side of it, then I'm going to add my double yarn overs and my 2 stitch markers so that I keep track of those. Then I am back to the other end, and now I'm working a wrong side row, heading back the other direction. Since you've just worked a pair of double yarn overs, when you're coming back the other direction, you're going to want to work one as a knit and one as a purl. Other than that, you can work those double yarn overs any way you want through the rest of the pattern, or I should say the column of stitches that will come from those double yarn overs. Now, the double yarn overs are not included in the pattern because you can add them whenever you want, and they're not going to matter once you finish this. So you're going to have those 2 stitches that are going to be inside of those stitch markers in 4 spots. You'll have it midway through a front panel, and then at the back. And again, or I shouldn't say the back, because at this point it's not the back. You just have, you have this shape. So your double yarn overs might be here. Oops, got this the wrong way. I put them down at the edge so you can kind of see where they're going to be on the piece as you're thinking about it. But they'll probably be maybe up here, 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 and here. Something like that. And as you go through the pattern, you can work those however you want. What I found most helpful, because it's worked in reverse stockinette, is I worked those columns of 2 stitches in stockinette stitch, so that as I came across them, I get to my stitch marker, I know what I'm supposed to do, just work them in stockinette. It makes it really easy to find them, but it really doesn't matter. You can work them however you find easiest. And then you just keep knitting. You've got those 4 columns of 2 stitches each that are inside their stitch markers. Otherwise, it's just following the charts, and you're just making this shape. When you are nearly done, this is still what you will have. Once you finish the bottom border and you are on your bind off row, that's when all the magic happens. At that point, we're going to, on the bind off row, again, we're going to start binding off. And it's not until we get to our first column of stitches from the double yarn overs that we'll do anything with them at all. So bind off, bind off, bind off. Now we get here. Then you're going to drop all those stitches all the way back to your double yarn overs, which is why it's so important to keep track of where those are. And then bind off some more. We're going to get to the other side, what's going to become the back of the sleeve, and drop all those stitches. That's when we seam for our sleeve. And there's a whole other video tutorial explaining how to do that. But you're basically just taking a crochet hook and chaining up the strands of yarn from back here, through here, and the reverse. The sort of ladder of loose yarn from the front will get chained up through the back. And now you have a really stable, solid sleeve that maintains the gradient or the fade, or however you want to do your Shweater. Is super easy. And the nice thing about it is that it sits like a shawl, and because the shaping is very similar to raglan shaping, it just sits on shoulders really nicely. Since you have the sleeves, it's got a little bit of something to hold on to, so that you can see I've been moving around this whole time and they just stay put. When you finish your first sleeve, you'll finish binding off. You'll go over to your second sleeve. And my lights turned off. That's super helpful. Okay, and we're back. So once you've finished your first sleeve, you'll finish binding off the whole back panel. You'll come around and you'll just repeat the process for the second sleeve. So the first pair of stitches from the double yarn over, you'll drop, you'll bind off the sleeve, get around to the other side, drop those stitches, seam up the sleeve front and back, and then finish binding off the other front panel, and that's it, and you're done. So it sounds complicated when you're reading it out on paper, but in reality, all that you're doing is working a top-down shawl with increases here and here, and along the top edge here. So very similar to, again, it's just a half hexagon or a half circle shape. But when you're ready for your sleeves, you're going to add a pair of yarn overs. And for the Fallow Fields Shweater in particular, you're going to add it so that the center motif on both the left and right hand panels, or what are going to become the front panels, are on the sleeves. So you want them inside of those pairs of double yarn overs. And then it's just, again, continuing to knit a top-down half hexagon shawl. So I hope that has been a helpful explanation for how the Shweater is constructed. And now that you know how it's constructed, you truly can do this with almost any top-down shawl pattern that you wanted to. It's going to be trickier with some patterns, especially if you've got a lot of stitches moving around in there, because it will interrupt the pattern. But it's a simple concept that you can apply to anything you're ambitious enough to try, and it's really fun and straightforward. So I do hope that you will give it a try, and I do hope this has made it less confusing. If you ever get stuck with any of my patterns, or you have any questions at all, you can always email me at hello@woolstudios.com. You can find me on Ravelry as Wool Studios, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, you name it. Thank you so much, and happy knitting!